Assalamualaikum and good day. My name is Amriena Rasyada binti Muhammad Zaid.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day to Madam Roslinda and our fellow classmates. My name is Nur Farahain Rosman, and our group is going to discuss about language choice in multilingual communities.
So what is linguistic repertoire? Linguistic repertoire is the skills or knowledge that someone has on one or more languages. For example, Kalala knows Kingwana and he uses standard Zairin Swahili at school, and he also uses Indo-Bil towards his family, and he uses the formal and informal she in his tribes. So this shows that Kalala has different linguistic repertoire. Now let us move on to the domains of language use. So the domains of language use are affected by certain social factors. First, who the speaker is talking to, the function of the language, and the topic of discussion. For example, the domains of language use are in the domains of work, school, family, and religion. Now, this is an example of domains of language use. Anahina is bilingual Tongan New Zealander living in Auckland. She uses Tongan with her family and her grandmother. However, she uses some English words when she is with her older sisters when they are talking about school or while doing their work. Another example will be on urban bilingual Paraguayans. This is because they use Guarani and Spanish, and the Paraguayans they switch between these two codes for different domains. An example is given here in the table. So what is modeling? Modeling variety and code choice. An example here is given where Maria chooses to use Portuguese at home and she uses Portuguese to older people at the Catholic Church, but she switches to use English at school and at work. Now, what are the three social factors in domains of language use? What does affect the domains of language use in one's community? First is participant, second is setting, and third is topic. So participant, setting, and topic, there are three significant social factors in code choice, and it is useful to pick up huge generalities regarding any group of people or community that speaks. So why is there a need to domains of language use? This is because it is possible to attract a very simple model that summarizes the customs or the norms of language use in a culture by knowing about the knowledge about the domains of use in the community. However, there are circumstances where there are other social factors that may affect the code choice. This is because the components of a domain do not always fit with each other. They are known as congruent, not congruent, and the people may select a particular code because it makes them easier to discuss a particular topic. For example, at home, people often discuss work or school, and they like to use the language associated with those domains. Therefore, there are other social factors that may affect the code choice in a community. So the first factor is the social distance. Social distance dimension is relevant. For example, how well do they know each other? The participants, are the speakers, strangers, are they friends, are they family members? Kalala, for example, he would use a different code to each different social distance. Secondly, the status relationship between individuals. This may be vital to decide on the usage of the appropriate code. Social role may also be essential, and it is often a factor contributing to status differences between societies. For instance, a high-status official will be addressed in standard Swahili in many contexts. Another example will be in Singapore, when they will be using English, as English is the most frequently selected code for official transactions, regardless of the speaker's ethnicity. Another typical role relationships are teacher and student, doctor and patient, and official and citizen. The same person may be spoken to in a different code depending on their status relationship. Are they speaking as a teacher or as a parent or as a customer in the marketplace? In Bukavu, for instance, a teacher named Mr. Mukala will insist on using standard Swahili to his students. Meanwhile, when he speaks to his family or his wife, he will use Congo, their tribal language, to talk. While in the marketplace, he is addressed in Kingwana as the local variety of Swahili. Next factor will be formality. So the features of the setting and the dimension of formality, they are also important in selecting an appropriate variety or code. For example, in Paraguay, whether the interaction takes place in a rural as opposed to an urban setting, so this is crucial to appropriate language use. Other relevant factors that may relate to the social dimensions of formality and status is that when the Paraguayans, they use Spanish as the appropriate language for formal interactions. Another factor is function or goal of the interaction. For example, what is the language being used for? Is the speaker asking for a favor or giving orders to someone? When Kalala applies for an office job, he uses standard written Swahili on the application form, and he will use the most formal style of standard Swahili at the interview. And when he mocks his younger brother, his family members, he uses in the bill the code in which his vocabulary of insult is the most extensive. So, what are the domains of language use? This is because it is easy to summarize a language norm or a culture in a particular community. What are the factors that may affect the domains of language use? They are participants, setting, and topic. What are other factors that may affect the domains? Are social distance, status relationship, formality, and goal or function of the interaction.
Now let's focus on diglossia. Diglossia is a term used in sociolinguistics to refer to situations where two different varieties of a language co-occur throughout a speech community, where each variety has a distinct range of social function. The social function is divided into two, which are formal and casual functions. The variety at the formal end of the scale could be regarded as high variety, while the most casual variety could be labeled as low variety. There are three crucial features in diglossia. The first one is two distinct varieties of the same language are used in the community. with one regarded as a high variety and the other a low variety. The H variety refers to the standard formal language, while the L variety is the informal or casual language that we use to communicate every day. Secondly, each variety is used for quite distinct functions, where H and L will complement each other. This is because we'll automatically change our speech style when we talk to different audience. For example, we use the H variety or formal language in an official setting, and we will use low variety when we are talking casually to friends. The third feature is no one uses the H variety in everyday conversation. We can observe our own daily conversation, which normally revolves around informal setting. So it would sound unnatural and rather peculiar if we use the H variety to converse with others in our daily life. Also, others may find it difficult to understand our speech. Looking into more features of diglossia. Most of the vocabulary of H and L varieties is the same. However, the H variety vocabulary includes many more formal and technical terms, while the L variety has words for everyday objects because we use the words in daily conversation. The degree of difference in the pronunciation of L and H varieties differs from place to place. This also includes different dialects that people use in different places. The grammar of the two linguistically related varieties also differs. Often, the grammar of H variety is morphologically more complicated. This is because the H variety is the book language. In most diglossia situations, the H variety would not occur in everyday conversation, and the L variety would generally seem odd in writing. Next, the attitudes to high and low variety in a diglossia situation. Generally, people admire the H variety even when they cannot understand it. The attitudes to H variety are usually very respectful. It has prestige in the sense of high status. These attitudes are reinforced by the fact that H variety is the one which is described and fixed or standardized in grammar books and dictionaries. Meanwhile, the attitudes to the L variety are varied and often ambivalent. For example, in Switzerland, people are quite comfortable with their L variety and use it all the time. So we can say that in Switzerland they have positive attitudes towards L variety. Meanwhile, in Haiti, although both French and Haitian Creole were declared as national languages, many people still regard French, which is the H variety, as the only real language of the country. They ignore the existence of Haitian Creole as the low variety, which in fact everyone uses for their everyday interactions. So, while its very existence is denied by some, others may regard the L variety as the best way of expressing their real feelings. People generally do not think of the L variety as worth describing. Next, diglossia and bilingualism. Diglossia is a characteristic of speech communities rather than individuals. Individuals who speak two languages are called bilingual. The societies or speech communities are called diglossic. Diglossia describes societal bilingualism, where two varieties are required to cover for all the community's domains for formal or informal occasion. There are some diglossic communities with very limited individual bilingualism. For example, in Haiti, more than 90% of the population is monolingual in Haitian Creole. Consequently, they cannot actively contribute in more formal domains as they are monolinguals in the low variety language. The table shown illustrates the relationship between diglossia and bilingualism by Fishman 2003. Number 1. Both diglossia and bilingualism It refers to a situation where the society is diglossic. Two languages are required to cover for the social domains and most individuals are bilingual. Number 2. Bilingualism without diglossia. It describes situation where individuals are bilingual, but there is no community-wide functional differentiation in the use of their languages. Many English-speaking countries fit this description. For instance, individuals may be bilingual in the USA, Australia, and England, but the two languages are not used by the whole community in different domains. Number 3. Diglossia without bilingualism. It describes the situation of politically united groups where two languages are used for different functions, but by largely different speech communities. This situation tends to characterize colonized countries with clear-cut social class divisions. In example, the elite speak one language and the lower classes use another language. Lastly, number 4 describes the situation of monolingual groups, and Fishman suggests that this is typical of isolated ethnic communities where there is little contact with other linguistic groups. Now, let's look at polyglossia. It refers to the coexistence of multiple languages in one society or area. The term polyglossia has been used for situations where a community regularly uses more than 3 languages. The term is used to describing situations where a number of distinct codes or varieties are used for clearly distinct purposes or in clearly distinguishable situations. So it basically is similar to diglossia. Polyglossia describes speech community with multiple languages, while diglossia describes speech society with a language. There is a division of labor between the languages of H and L varieties, which means the H variety serves different social function than the L variety. There are changes in a diglossia situation in speech communities. Diglossia has been described as a stable situation, so it is possible for two varieties of the high and low to continue to exist side by side for centuries, just like the Arabic-speaking countries. Alternatively, one variety may gradually displace the other. For example, Latin language was ousted from its position as the high variety language in Europe as the low varieties gradually expanded or leaked up into more formal domains. Finally, the term of both diglossia and polyglossia describes as complementary code people use in all communities. The term diglossia is generalized to cover any situation where two languages are used for different functions in a speech community, especially where one language is used for H functions and the other is for L functions. People use different varieties or codes in formal contexts as opposed to relaxed, casual situations. There are clearly identifiable linguistic differences between the more formal and the more colloquial styles of a language.
Next topic that we will look at is code switching. So what is code switching or code mixing? People sometimes switch code within a domain or social situation. For example, when there is some obvious change in the situation, such as the arrival of a new person, it is easy to explain the switch code. In example 8, Mir is Maori, and although the rest of the conversation is in English, Sarah then switches to Maori to greet her. When Sarah switches to Maori, the Maori greeting is to express solidarity. So a code switch may be related to a particular participant or addressee. So another example of code switching is emblematic switching. In A, Tamati uses a Maori tag at the beginning of his utterance, the word Engari, while the Mandarin speaker in B uses a final tag, that is Dakai, that means probably. This kind of switching is sometimes called emblematic switching or text switching. So the switch is an interjection or a linguistic tag in the other language that serves as an ethnic identity marker. And the exchange in C that occurred between two Americans, Mexican, or Chicanos in the USA. So the tag here served as a solidarity marker between the minority ethnic group members whose previous conversation has been entirely in English. So why do we code switching? Because the switch indicates a change in the social situation and takes positive account of the presence of a new participant. For example, in a Polish family living in Poland in the 1950s, their family used Polish in the home. When the local English-speaking priest called, however, everyone started to speak in English. So there is a presence of a new participant, that is the local English-speaking priest. So that is the reason why they could switch. Another another reason why a speaker may switch to another language because a speaker wants to show a signal of group membership and shared ethnicity with the addressee. Such switches are often very short and they are made primarily for social reasons to signal the speaker's ethnic identity and solidarity with the addressee. There are speakers who are not very proficient in the second language and they may use brief phrases and words for this purpose. For instance, the Scottish Highlanders, they are not proficient speakers of Gaelic. Nevertheless, they will express their identification with the local Gaelic speech community by using Gaelic tags. And Maori people often use Maori words and phrases in this way too, whether their knowledge of Maori is extensive or not. What are the aspects of code switching? So the aspects of code switching is identity and relationship between the speakers or the participants. For instance, in Pamaka village, the young people they switch between the local community language, that's Pamaka, and the language of Sranan Tongo. So Pamaka is the usual language of interaction in the community, but the young people often switch to Sranan Tongo to signal their sophistication or to show the modern way of speaking. Next, we have formality. So when there are more formal relationships that involve status differences too, for example, doctor and patient, administrator and client, they often involve the H variety or code. So they are more formal. While friendly relationships that involve minimal social distance, for instance, neighbor or friend, they generally involve an L variety or code. So that is on formality. Next, we have the switch from a personal interaction to a more formal transaction. So this kind of role switch is commonly associated within the multilingual communities. For example, in Beijing, when a government administrator deals with a query from someone who comes from his hometown in Guangzhou, they begin to sort out their business in Mandarin at first, but when they realize that they are from the same hometown, they switch to Cantonese to exchange stories about schools and their teachers. And often salespeople in shops in bilingual communities, they will switch to the language of their customers. So that is it on the switch from personal interaction to formal transaction. Next, we have the aspect of the topic. There are referential contents that are more appropriate or more easily expressed in one language than the other. So there are certain kinds of um, referential content, and people may switch code within a speech event to discuss a particular topic.
Now we will talk about metaphorical switching. It refers to the ability to effectively draw on the different associations of the two codes or varieties. The example shown is a speech by Mr. Rupa to his village folks. He switches between the variety of Tok Pisin and Buang language throughout his speech. Usually, the specific reason for a switch can be identified with reasonable confidence. For example, when a new person joins the audience, when there is a change in the topic, a direct quotation, or humorous utterances. However, the example shown does not have any of those. So, what is the social meaning of these rapid switches? From the example earlier, we can see that Mr. Rupa effectively draws on the different associations of the two codes through metaphorical switching. He uses Buang, the local tribal language, to emphasize his membership of the Buang community and to construct his local identity. He highlights that he shares identity with his audience. He also uses the official language, Tok Pisin, to emphasize on his superior knowledge. His use of Tok Pisin also constructs his professional identity as a businessman. Each of the codes he uses represents or symbolizes a set of social meanings. For instance, Buang symbolizes high solidarity, equal status, and friendly feelings, while Tok Pisin represents social distance, status, and the referential information of the business world. So we can see that he is constantly switching between these two codes in his speech to highlight his different roles in the local community to communicate effectively to his audience. The use of skillful code switching as shown here operates like metaphor to enrich the communication. By switching between the two or more codes, the speakers can convey effective meaning as well as the information. Moving on, let's take a closer look at lexical borrowing. The term refers to the adoption of individual words or vocabulary from another language. This kind of switching usually occurs due to lack of vocabulary in a language. As an example, when speaking in second language, people will often use a term from their mother tongue because they do not know the appropriate word in the second language. Apart from that, people also borrow words to express a concept or to describe an object when there is no obvious word available in the language that they are using. Borrowing of this kind generally involves single words, which are mainly nouns, and it is motivated by lexical needs. Lexical borrowings often differ from code switches in form too, as borrowed words are usually adapted to the speaker's first language, especially in terms of pronunciation and grammar. The words are pronounced and used grammatically as if they were part of the speaker's first language. For example, the word Maori is similarly adapted by most English speakers. They use an English diphthong ow rather than a longer ow sound. They also pluralize the word by adding the English plural inflection s and talk of the Maoris. However, in the Maori language, the plural is not marked by an inflection on the noun.
And there you go, we are almost done with code switching. So, to conclude, people are often unaware of the fact that they code switch. When the attention is drawn to this behavior of code switching, they may tend to apologize for it, condemn it, and indicate the disapproval of mixing languages. They are attitudes to a minority language, and these are important to determine not only its use in a code switching style, but also its very chances of survival. So the individuals, they draw on their knowledge of the norms when they talk to one another. They may choose to conform to them and to follow the majority pattern using the H variety when there are formal transitions. For example, when giving a formal lecture. And people who draw on their knowledge of social linguistic patterns and the social meanings when they code switch within a particular domain. The skillful speakers or communicators, they dynamically construct many different social identities in interaction by code switching.